Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I'm going to get into the wide receiver market and how it's shaping up with some of the guys that are under contract, oddly enough. But before I do that, one last time, I want to remind you guys, if you have any comments, questions during today's live episode, to use the GSMCpodcast.net link, the tip and donations link with any of your questions. I'm able to see your question pop up right away if you use that link over here to my right in the chat box. It makes it better for me, it makes it more fun engaging with you guys. I always appreciate you guys doing that. It's a big help for the show as well as all the other shows across the network. So again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Using that is a big help for us at GSMC, using that with any of your questions. But like I mentioned, talking about now the wide receiver market, and big money could be coming to this market and this position. Probably the highest other paid position in the NFL, at least offensively, that's not a quarterback. You could argue pass rusher, but I think with these potential contracts coming in for these wide receivers, that could change. And it could be quarterback, wide receiver, pass rusher in terms of who's making the most money in the NFL. Looking at just the overall contract situations, a lot of the best wide receivers are on expiring deals or are approaching their fifth-year options. Some of those are Justin Jefferson. For now, will play the 2024 season on his fifth-year option deal that the Vikings picked up. You also have CeeDee Lamb on his fifth-year option as well this season. Ayuk is in on his fifth-year deal, fifth-year option as well in 2024. Amon-Ra St. Brown on the final year of his 4-year contract, no fifth-year option for him, as well as Jamar Chase, who is in the last year of his deal, but he still has that fifth-year option. Comments have been made about Jamar starting to have negotiations with the Bengals, but they have said that nothing's really been done as of yet. Those guys really round off the big picture of these big wide receivers that aren't available, but you're looking at them, you're keeping track of them over there in your side eye view, because they're going to want a lot of money. And with these teams that they're currently on right now, it hasn't been the smoothest of sailing except for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think everybody else has had questions about where this is all going with their negotiations. Starting with Justin Jefferson on this topic, he finished last season with 68 receptions. He missed 7 games, but still had over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. Their general manager in Minnesota has said that they're not going to trade him. They were close to a contract extension at the start of 2023, but as Adam Schefter reported in that time, a $30 million per year offer was made to Justin Jefferson, but he turned that down. And that's pretty crazy to say, to report from Adam Schefter. But a lot of people now have started to think that you might have to offer Justin Jefferson a contract that makes him the highest paid player in the NFL other than any quarterback. That title currently is held by Nick Bosa, who's on a 5-year, $170 million deal with the 49ers. He's getting paid $34 million per year. So if Justin Jefferson is turning down a $30+ million offer per year already, you could imagine that they've offered him 31, 32 maybe, or 30 and a half to just pass Tyreek Hill, who currently is the highest paid wide receiver per year. You might have to do something like that because he has said he wants to reset the wide receiver market, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. You could argue he's the best wide receiver in the league with how talented he is. He might not have the speed of Tyreek, but he could do basically everything that any other wide receiver can do. And how important he's been for the Vikings. In all honesty, nobody would really realistically talk about the Vikings if it wasn't for Justin Jefferson, based on who's on their team right now. That's just a fact. He brings so much to their team. He makes them so much better when he's on the field. And you saw how much they missed him this past season. Are they willing to cough up that amount of money? It still has to be seen. Other things are going to have to be given up, but that's where he stands right now. They would love to have a negotiation agreed upon before this season, before he gets the free agency next season, but that's where it all stands right now with Jefferson. No trade, according to their general manager, but it is something to keep an eye on. If they don't want to pay that money, will somebody else want to pay that money? It's something interesting to keep tabs on. Similarly, with CeeDee Lamb, he, unlike Justin Jefferson, probably had his healthiest season, his best season this past year, had 135 receptions, 1,749 yards, and 12 receiving touchdowns. The best statistical season for a Dallas Cowboy wide receiver. He led the NFL with those 135 receptions and was second and third in the NFL with the yards that he had and the touchdowns that he had. He made the first team All-Pro team, and he's also an otherworldly wide receiver that is up there toe-to-toe with some of the best in the game right now. Has a great production with the Dallas Cowboys. Again, how good would they be? How good would Dak have been last season, which was one of his best seasons? But if you took CeeDee Lamb out of it, how well and how much would that have impacted his performance? I would probably say a lot. He probably wouldn't be anywhere close to how good he performed if it wasn't for CeeDee Lamb. But that just shows how important he is. Probably the second most important player on that roster other than Micah Parsons. And he's going to be due up for an extension. So how they monitor that amount of money to who gets what, I'm sure CeeDee Lamb feels like he could at least get close to 30 or make $30 million per year. And if he wants that amount of money, how much is Micah going to want in a pass rushing market that's already pushing $30 million, $34 million with Bosa, like I mentioned? Most others make around $25 to $27 million per year. That's a lot of money allocated to just two positions. I get it that they're really great, some of the best in the league at their positions, but the Cowboys are already going to take a big cap hit with Dak's contract going into next year as well if he leaves. So they have some balancing to do with their checkbook with these three great wide players on their team. If I were to predict, I don't think they're going to be able to keep all three. One of them at least is gonna have to go. I don't think it'll be CeeDee and Micah. Just going back to the conversation I've had before with Dak, it's looking like this could be his last year. If it means keeping Micah and CeeDee, I think that's a pretty simple decision to take if you're the Cowboys. But nothing has really been moved on that aspect with CeeDee Lamb. Same with Amon-Ra St. Brown, a great season that he just had this year. 119 receptions, over 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns were all career highs for the wide receiver of the Detroit Lions. Earned All-Pro honors, and the Lions have met with his representatives at the NFL Combine about a new deal. Dan Campbell has said that he's wanted to sign not only Amon-Ra St. Brown, but Jared Goff before the 2024 season. So that's positive. At least the Lions are moving in that direction. And they haven't had too many moves in free agency so far. So you could take that as a sign that they're planning already a certain amount of money that they want to have saved up to make sure they sign Amon-Ra and Jared Goff. It's not like we've heard negative things coming out of them. So out of all the wide receivers, I think that deal is the closest at getting done, and I expect it to be done before the season starts, before we get into training camp and all that sort of stuff. Moving on to Brandon Ayuk, probably one of the more negative ones to talk about. He's coming off another great season as well. All these receivers are some of the top in the league. He had 75 receptions, over 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns, had a record, broke Jerry Rice's record with the 49ers of having 7 games with 100 yards receiving in those games in a single season. No one's done that since Jerry Rice, and Ayuk just did that. He's turned into their most reliable pass-catching option. Debo's all over the place. You could use him anywhere. Just in terms of passes caught and being a receiver, being a threat at that position, I think Ayuk surpassed him a little bit, and Debo already signed a 3-year, $71.5 million deal. Ayuk might want more than that, just because of how great he's done receiver-wise and He led the 49ers in targets the last 2 seasons. He has put up similar numbers to CeeDee, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So if you're him, why wouldn't you make a lot of money like they would? And John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have said that they want to get this extension done, but Ayuk has given off the different vibe and has said that, they're not really in a place yet where he agrees on the value. And if I were to say a receiver to move on this season, it would probably be him. I don't think, at this point, if it's all still so negative, I just don't see a deal getting done. I don't know where he'll end up, but it just doesn't seem like the 49ers are ready to commit a lot of money to him, especially if they've said that they want to pay Brock Purdy a lot of money, like I talked about yesterday, or a few days ago. So that's something they have to figure out, and that's where Ayuk stands. Jamar Chase is another one. Healthiest season just this past year. 100 receptions, 7 touchdowns. You don't really have a rush with him because next offseason he'll have a 5th-year option, so it'll be his last year. But people will speculate about it. Joe Burrow already got paid. They're reluctant to give T. Higgins a contract right now, which could suggest that they know they're going to have to pay Jamar a lot of money. So on his side of it, it could be positive in that way. If they don't pay T. Higgins, of course you don't want to lose a teammate, but if you're just strictly talking about Jamar Chase, making sure he gets as much money as possible, it could be a better sign if T. Higgins is on a different team. He doesn't get paid with the Bengals. He gets a lot of money elsewhere. That way the Bengals are ensuring themselves to keeping Jamar Chase by having a lot of money saved up. Their executive vice president, Katie Blackburn, has said that they're going to study up on what happens with all these other receivers. So they're fortunate in that way to kind of see the landscape play out a little bit. But regardless, they're going to have to pay in that ball range as well. So no real rush with him, but just keep him in the back of your mind. He is coming up as well. And then you have other receivers, like I mentioned. T. Higgins, he was franchise tagged. He's requested a trade. He wants what he feels he deserves, but we'll see if the Bengals actually trade him. They don't have to, but if teams out there are really interested, build up the assets to trade him, that could be something to monitor as well. And Nico Collins as well is reportedly interested in an extension as well. You saw how well he played for the Houston Texans, how great of a connection he developed with C.J. Stroud. That's another one to watch. He's in the last year of his deal coming up, so seeing how well he performs this year, if they perform to the level I think they will, I expect him to make a lot of money next year. So those are all the receivers and how it's all sort of following up right now. A lot of them stand in a gray area. Nothing's really moving for Justin Jefferson right now, at least in the public eye, but you don't think these receivers will move too much because of how great they are, but you never know. In the NFL, one of these guys could honestly be traded during the draft, and you could see one of these A.J. Brown situations if it doesn't work out. Ayuk could be the most likely candidate for that if I were to pick one as well. Like I mentioned, I don't think he'll get an extension done, but it's definitely interesting to see, break it down, how all the money works out for these teams. Something I'm sure I'm going to touch on later on this offseason or into the season. But for now, I will put a pin in that and transition into the last segment of the show, not before I go to the last break of the show. And on the other side, I'll bring you my over-under picks for the win totals for about half of the NFL teams in the league after BetMGM dropped their predictions as well. So that's coming up shortly after this last break of the show. You're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.